we're saying bye-bye October, and of course we're ushering into a new month. November is a definitive month of very many things. For some of us who have beards, it is a month where we do grow beards in commemoration of the women or people who are still suffering with cancer. So expect to see very many bearded men on the streets of Kampala. But of course, away from also that, there are so many other things that we expect to happen this month. Among them is that today, guys at universities are hitting school again. After how long? I can imagine. Some of you who are supposed to be in third year, now you're in first year. I don't know how that will be coped up with, but I know for a fact that at least I will bless God that we have started a new month. It also means we have new opportunities, new cadres that will be ushering ourselves into new challenges as well. But far from that, I have teams here with me representing something different for the month they left and the month they are going into. And the first person I want to catch or touch base with is the lady in pink. I don't know if that song does much, but anyway, I'll start with the lady in black for that matter. Let me start with you, Molen. Good morning.
A very good morning to you too.
How are you?
I am all right. I am all right. Doing okay.
We had a long discussion about your dress styles, and we ended up failing to find the true names. Okay. Maybe I should be asking you. So this dress is called what now? The other one was open roof.
My dear, I was going to say the same thing. You want Ruben to again call it open roof. I think there is I need to one time just bring in a fashion expert to explain to the entire team, but then I think I will need Ruben to be closer, because really there's a whole big discussion about fashion. But yes, a very good morning to you as well, our viewers. A very warm welcome to a new week, one that we are hopeful for, and there is a lot going on. Personally, I am very excited about the fact that we do have COP26 that is starting today. And yes, a lot of world leaders have tuned in. We have seen the President of France already on ground. Joe Biden is already on ground. The momentum is that high, Felix, and this is one I'm really hoping for.
So basically, what's going to happen at this COP? Is it COP what?
COP26. It is the 26th conference of parties. So COP basically in full is conference of parties.
Parties?
Yes.
What do you mean parties?
So all the countries that subscribe, that have been engaged with the UN on this climate change convention, have had to be named as parties to that conference. So there are over 160 so far.
Wow. So is Uganda attending?
Yes. We have a Minister of Water and Environment leading our negotiators from Uganda. They're already in Glasgow. And we do have most of the climate scientists also from the Climate Change Department, from the ministry. They are on ground. And most of those actually leading to our updated, nationally contributed, determined contributions to explain the climate status of Uganda. So I'm also hoping a lot from them, because I want to see what they're presenting on the global scale, on what can be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
You should report to them. Oh, you don't know, you're in. I was going to tell you what to report to those people. But anyway, also something quite interesting. How did you spend your weekend? I managed to sneak into how you spent. I want to hear what you say. How do you spend your weekend morning?
I can tell you one thing. I do have hobbies, but this one I like so much. I like swimming. I like swimming. And I think I should one of these days register for competitions, because I've realized I'm so good at swimming, I could win a competition. Yeah. So I was doing much of that swimming. No, I'm really good. And I think Priscilla will agree with me. She has seen me do that.
Really? Okay. I would want to bring in Priscilla now and Robert, but I'll still hang in a bit there. But I think just one last question, Molen, before we get into our international stories.
Yeah.
Away from just swimming, any other thing you do as a passion?
Yeah. And I think one of those is traveling. I like traveling a lot. And then reading. I would do myself injustice if I spent a month without having a new thing to read about.
Reading.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything you're reading lately?
Yeah, I'm reading something about G20 countries.
G20 countries it is. So for some of you, our viewers out there, if you want to know what to read clearly, now you have a reader guide. I don't know if it's called a reading guide or reader guide or guide reader or reading the guide, one of those things. But of course, so much has also been happening on the international scene, and we would want to share with you some of the stories that have been breaking the international scene before we get into our local stories later on with Robert and Priscilla. Now, in our first story, we'll be looking at something quite unusual, and that is again the COP. Is it COP20?
COP26.
COP26.
Yes.
Well, we see world leaders merging to look at exactly what better can be done in terms of environment. Before we get into that, we'll first look at these other stories where we'll be looking at man with knife stabs at least 17 on Tokyo train and starts a fire. Now, a man dressed in Batman's and Joker costumes attacked passengers on a Tokyo train line Sunday, injuring 17 people as many party goers headed into the city, a center for Halloween gathering. Now, NHK Public Television reported at least 17 passengers were wounded, including one seriously. Now, NHK said the suspect, 24, after stabbing passenger, poured a liquid resembling oil and set a fire. I thought it was a Halloween stunt, one witness told the Urimi newspaper, recalling the moment he saw other passengers running in a panic towards his train car. When I saw a man walking this way, slowly waving a long knife. There was blood on the weapon, he said. Now, the attacker was arrested on spot and was being investigated. Suspicions of the attempt of murder, and his motive was not immediately known. A man believed to be in his 60s was unconscious and in critical condition after being stabbed. Now, still international stories, thousands call for reforms to monarchy government in Bangkok. Protesters once again turned out onto the streets of Bangkok, calling for reforms to the Thai monarchy and the military government. With thousands in attendance, Sunday's rally was one of the biggest protests in recent months. Now, despite being temporarily disrupted by rain, small-scale demonstrations have been a constant fixture, particularly in Bangkok's Din Dieng neighborhood, some of which have led to clashes with police and of course with other forces. Now, it was at one of these protests that the teenage boy was shot in the head in August, leaving him in a coma for 2 months before eventually he died last week. Now, still international stories. Our last story, second last story for that matter. Sudan's coup, Khartoum barricaded by pro-democracy activists. Now, Sudanese protesters have barricaded roads in the capital, Khartoum, as part of week-long demonstration against a military coup. 3 people were killed on Saturday when security forces fired shots and tear gas to disperse protesters in the nearby city of Omdurman, medics said. The Interior Minister denied the live rounds have been fired. The army seized power on Monday, detaining Prime Minister Abdallah Bandouk, home and civilian leaders. The UN Sudan envoy Volker Perthes met Mr. Hamdok at his residence on Sunday. Now, Mr. Hamdok was well but remained under house arrest. We discussed options for mediation and the way forward for Sudan. He added, COP leader General Abdel Fattah dissolved civilian rule on Monday.
Still on the international scene, climate action is critical but only offers modest steps. Now, leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies have agreed to tackle the critical and urgent threat of climate change, but angered activists by offering few concrete commitments to limit global warming. Now, wrapping up a summit in Rome, the leaders of the G20 pledged on Sunday to stop funding coal-fired power plants in poor countries, but set no timetable for phasing it out at home. They agreed to cap the global rise in temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, but made only a vague commitment to seek carbon neutrality by or around mid-century. This was the result of days of tough negotiations among diplomats, and it leaves huge work to be done at the broader United Nations COP26 Climate Summit in Scotland, which starts this week. Now, while Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi and French President Emmanuel Macron described the G20 as the success, the outcome disappointed the chief of the UN as well as the leader of the United Kingdom. Now, Draghi said the declaration went further on climate than any G20 statement before. He noted that it referred to limiting global warming at the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that scientists say is vital to avoid disaster. We changed goalposts, Draghi told reporters. Now we'll move over to our local scene.
Well, looking at our local scene this morning, there is so much that we want to focus on, and we'll begin with some of the stories that were in our bulletins, beginning with prayers that were held yesterday, where Kampala Catholic Archdiocese celebrated 50 years of existence that climaxed at Nalwoga Cathedral in Kampala. The diocese apostolic administrator, Bishop Paul Semwogerere, was the main celebrant. Prime Minister Robin Nabbanja was the chief guest during a service that was attended by Buganda Katikiro Charles Peter Mayiga, State Minister for Education Dr. John Chrysostom Muyingo, among others. It was also jubilations as Kampala Archdiocese held scientific celebrations for the 55 years of existence. Paul Semwogerere condemned the recent bomb blasts in Komamboga and along Masaka Road at Lugalanga in a bus that was heading for Bushenyi. The Katikiro of Buganda, Charles Peter Mayiga, asked Church to continue protecting Buganda's interests following the ongoing debate on my land. The Bishop, Joseph Kizito, who is serving as the Catholic Ordinary in South Africa, told the Premier that he had had information of democracy situation in Uganda and other security challenges. Prime Minister Nabbanja asked the Church to help government in mobilization of the public towards embracing the parish development model in fighting against poverty at the grassroots. Nabbanja also made a modest contribution of 50 million Uganda shillings on behalf of government towards different activities of the Catholic Church.
Robin Nabbanja has urged Greater Masaka residents to embrace and support a new television that has been launched in Masaka. True Nabudu Television is owned by a former UBC presenter and now a senior presidential advisor on Greater Masaka sub-region, Justin Namere. Premier Robin Nabbanja officiated the launch that was also attended by the State Minister for ICT and National Guidance, Joyce Sebugwao. The Prime Minister Robin Nabbanja commended the work and innovative ideas of True Nabudu television proprietors, saying it will supplement government efforts aimed at reducing unemployment and boost business in Masaka sub-region. Nabbanja promised government support towards the True Television and commended it for fronting government programs and local content. State Minister for ICT and National Guidance, Joyce Nabosa, recommended thorough training of media personalities before going on air and also innovation and advice presenters over possible indecent dressing.
Yesterday, cities around the world celebrated the World City Day. We revisit Kampala's history and how it evolved from a perceived 7-hill city to now 21 hills. Kampala Capital City Authority is made up of 5 divisions that include Central, Kawempe, Machindye, Rubaga, and Nakawa. Kampala was created in 1962 as a city in Uganda. Where was its name derived from then? From one of the theories to another, which also holds more water and sounds more convincing and authentic. At one time, it became part of West Mengo. It would be renamed Kampala District in 1974, a status it ceased to have in 2005, when it was referred to as Kampala Capital City Authority. Originally said to have been a town council comprising of, among others, Old Kampala, it is a city that was once a municipality. Such administrative setup were a brainchild of the colonial masters who at one time were in charge of the country and later came to be known as Uganda. It is a situation that is said to have been brought about by religious wars following the entry of Europeans and Arab explorers. The intervention of the then King of Uganda was aimed at addressing these religious misunderstandings, escalating the evolution of Kampala. This is how the idea of Kampala City on 7 hills came to be known. But does everyone share this point of view? Captain Francis Babu, who has been in Kampala, born and raised in Kampala, has lived to see Uganda's capital city grow. Originally a city of 7 hills, is now a city of over 21 hills and is expected to expand further.
Also celebrating the Day of the Girl Child, the President Uganda Law Society, Fiona Wall, has asked for the urgent tackling issues leading to the child marriages, violence, inequitable access to education and basic health care for the girl child amidst COVID-19 pandemic. Fiona Wall wants government to create an enabling environment for the development of the girl child. The President Uganda Law Society said that it's the responsibility of government to build capacity of the girl child in reclaiming their rights in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic situation. She was giving a keynote address to adolescent girls of Engender Girls Mentorship during the commemoration of International Day of Girl Child under the theme, I am the world's next thought leader. The founder Engender Girls Mentorship, Josephine Omuyide, said that if effectively supported during the adolescent years, girls have the potential to change the world as tomorrow's responsible mothers, workers, entrepreneurs, and political leaders. A global mental health project specialist, Eve Achan, said COVID-19 has put lives of many children at risk with increase of anxiety and depression. And the board chairperson Engender Girls Mentorship, Victor Kaiser, said the focus of the mentorship program is to advocate for the promotion and advancing of the rights of the girl child as per the gender equity commitment by international protocols.
Well, of course, much of that is what we'll be giving you later on. But of course, having looked at the local stories and international stories, I would want also to ask Robert and Priscilla. I didn't get a chance to say good morning, Robert.
Good morning to you, Felix, and of course, good morning to our lovely viewers. Happy New Month.
What's the plan for the new month, Priscilla?
Good morning to Uganda, and thank you so much for joining us for a brand new day and a brand new week. 1st of November is surely causing me to smell Christmas away, smell Nsenene coming closer, and all the craze that happens in the last 2 months before the year gets to wrap its business up. My name is Priscilla Nalwoga, and as per your question, I can only tell you that over the weekend, as we were celebrating World Cities Day, I was in Lira City and I had an interaction with the Mayor Sam Atul of Lira City, who was very eager to talk about how a new and young city is going to emerge and evolve in such a way that is going to influence affairs in Lango sub-region in a positive way and cause development, both social and economic, to the region. So in celebration of World Cities Day, we celebrate the cities that recently gained their status, and we are so proud of that as a development tool under government.
Well, of course, we hope that they will be able to follow into the true lines of being a city, and of course the efforts towards the same will be well realized. Now, we want also to give you some good tips as you do start the day and of course the month in terms of your health. And Robert has holding himself a hallelujah ginger tea drink there.
Definitely, if there is anything that must concern you, it should be your health. Today we are seeing tertiary institutions, universities opening up, but one of the things that is very important is how do you boost your body's ability to fight diseases? And a drink we recommend to you is Hallelujah Ginger Tea, Hallelujah Turmeric drink. These will boost your immune system As we know, usually we have 2 rainy seasons. November is also another wet month, and these come with a couple of colds, coughs, but with this drink, you're good to go.
Well, of course, also, I expect for you guys to share into our program by responding to our poll question. And of course, by doing that, you'll be able to share with us your opinions. Our poll question will be coming up soon for you to pick and share your ideas. But apart from that, we also have a song for the day, which we'll be going into right now. But when we come back, myself, Robert, and Priscilla will be diving into the news. We will be discussing issues of opening up universities, and of course much expectations later on when Robert will be hosting a guest, and he will also be looking at something quite crucial that did happen last week. Robert,
we'll be looking at the testing of COVID-19 at our entry point, which for now is Entebbe International Airport. We want to know what went wrong, how best can we improve this, and what is the status as of now if you're planning to come into this country regarding COVID-19 testing. And
Molin definitely will be giving us heads up on the COP26 cities.
Yes, we will talk more about COP26, but also as we look at that summit, the World Meteorological Organization has warned that the past 7 years are set to be the warmest years on record, and that is setting us to go beyond what we were targeting for in terms of global warming. So we'll look more into that report by World Meteorological Organization.
Perfect. Let's just take a break. When we come back, we will be diving into our newsreel, and later on, of course, to crown it all up, we'll be having Robin, and later, much later, Jagenda Semakura Zikusoka. But before all that, let's have our song so we do motivate you as you do kickstart this month and this Monday. studies. That is our Twitter handle, #UBCGMU, and WhatsApp 0709 60 25 92. And of course, for some of you who are following us on Facebook, be able to leave a message, and those on YouTube. Now, of course, knowing that universities will be opening today, we do want to get your true thoughts about this poll question.
All right, thank you so much, Felix Nkunda. Well, as you know, back in June, we were having the second wave of COVID-19, which led us into a total lockdown once again as the country of Uganda. We did have the president coming out to close. Among other sectors, the education sector was fully and completely closed. Over time, with the vaccination mass drives that we have been having within the country, the commitment was that by January 2022, we will be having education fully reopened. But he did declare that as of 1st November, we would have the higher education institutions, universities, tertiary institutions, reopening up for studies. And we do have the National Council of Higher Education having released guidelines to all universities, all tertiary institutions, on how they should actually reopen, adherence to SOPs, among other terms and conditions, for us to steer this ship back to normality and education. But the one big question that is lingering on our minds this morning, being the 1st of November, the doors are supposed to be opened, the gates are supposed to be opened, but are we ready as a country? Is the education sector ready? And I mean public and private, in enabling this move to actually come to maturity. We saw this challenge when we had the reopening of schools back in the beginning of the year, when you had the candidate classes reopening, and one of the challenges obviously was adherence to SOPs, social distancing, sanitization, and how do you actually monitor the COVID-19 cases when it comes to testings, how much testing was being done in schools. And we saw the repercussions of that being contributing to the second wave and the total lockdown that we had eventually in June. So many children went back to school and came out of school COVID-19 patients or victims for that matter. So now the big question is, Robert Kirabo, are we ready for these schools to actually reopen as of today?
First, Priscilla, I want to thank you so much, because I think to me that is what is most important here. When the president was speaking, there is a word he used. In his last address, I was looking at my notes, but I think the public didn't pick so much sense into this word. He said we need to have safe, I want to repeat that word, safe reopening. Not just reopening, but safe reopening. And I tried to move around some universities. At least I moved around in Nkumba, Chambogo. This summer I watched an interview with the Vice Chancellor, Makerere. They are doing somehow, moved somehow. But I want to tell you, when it comes to terror threats, we are very ready. Because you find that they have actually put more on that element of security, I think, after these bomb blasts that we had. But when it comes to COVID-19, the only way we would say we are ready is if we were sure that all non-teaching and teaching staff are vaccinated, that the teachers, that the students, those are 18 and above, because now we're looking at tertiary institutions and universities, are vaccinated. The situation as per now, we've not hit what would we desire to hit in terms of vaccination. I want to just take you back. By the time we closed universities, Chambogo had registered over 50 cases. Guru University was in about 95 cases. So the situation then wasn't that very good. And no wonder we had ensured that we put in place SOPs. By then, there was so much a bit, you know, Ugandans and globally, fear drives people to comply with the laws. Now, where you've had infection rates kind of going low, when the president also came out and made a statement that we shall open, either you're vaccinated or you're not going to beg people to die, because, you know, vaccination is the biggest opportunity that we have here to save lives when it comes to COVID. This has also created some element of people not taking vaccination that serious. So I think in terms of vaccination, which would be the gauge for how prepared we are not yet ready. When it comes to teaching, of course, for tertiary institutions, you might find that many of them have even been carrying out online learning. So I have no doubt that they are prepared to have the students back. They are prepared to lecture them, because they are not like this other, like say nursery that has been off for a long time. They have been having some bit of work happening at the university. Makere, those doing medicine, I think veterinary, have been attending classes. So with preparation of the universities, I have no problem. These are mature people, and these are levels of lecture, people at lecturing level. So I believe professors and all that, they are ready, they can organize themselves. But implementation of SOPs is what I think we are still lacking. Previously, we had these universities assure us that they had SOPs in place, that they tried what they were doing. But I believe we are opening, but not opening in a safe manner.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Robert. This is where I bring in Felix. You did hint on e-learning. Most of these universities, maybe even tertiary institutions, have actually been adopting to e-learning as a mode of continued education for their students. And the institutions that had received this approval from the National Council of Higher Education have been given a leeway to continue with the open distance e-learning program as a way of actually managing some of these tough SOPs, such as social distancing. And those that have not yet should, put in an application if they're capable of handling e-learning, and that can be approved still by the National Council of Higher Education, which begs the question of adoption of a technology in such a time as this, especially where education is concerned. We all know that by scale there is an imbalance in how education is received and perceived in this country. Different urban centers different from rural centers, and that imbalance there is going to cost this nation someday.
Yeah, clearly it comes as a challenge, and that's a matter of fact. However, Priscilla, we must get to a point of acceptance and believe that what we are faced with most recent as COVID-19 is not something that we can wait to go. Now, that then would mean that some institutions or some particular sectors of our livelihood must go into an adoption of complementing or complementary adoption. And what do I mean by this? When you look at the education sector in Uganda, for example, or in particular the higher education for that matter, we must find, or we must adopt what we call other ways of passing the same thing or giving the same facility or the same good or product for that matter. For the matter of universities, it's even much easier, because some of the universities we have been to, even for all of us on this set, you know that there's been what they call long distance
learning.
Yes, there's a long distance. You have people who do online. Some of you have been privileged even to study for some courses out of this country through online. And this is the new way of livelihood. In fact, opening up or not opening up universities shouldn't be a discussion for us to fuss about. I think we should have used this time to prepare for a total change of how things are done, because this then will help us deal with numbers. Some of you have been to universities where you've noticed that some people have been studying in Windows. Some of the universities we came from, we had some courses where people would study literally in Windows. You go to courses like BBA, you would be astonished by the number of students. You had a full hall and some people seated in the corridors. So we used to make fun of people and say people study by peeping, So to remedy, and this comes to remedy very many other things away from just COVID. Robert did talk about the issue of being ready. I would think in the same way, no one is ready. That's the honest truth. And even hospitals, where we expect, you will find they will tell you there's no PPE, there's no what. Even when you go to government, which should be the custodian of being ready, even the ministry, no one is ready for this thing they call COVID. But we can't stay stuck in a situation because we are actually not ready. I think this day gives a new opportunity for the education sector to unveil its capacity to float amidst all these challenges. And how is by also knowing how to work around this situation. COVID may manifest in many other ways. in many other ways. And this should be a good wake-up call for the ministry in charge of the education, that what can we do different? Thank God we had just had a discussion about the syllabus, probably 2-3 years ago before COVID came. We were having that discussion as a country. Now it falls directly well in this. And also, we want to start another discussion, Priscilla, about the kind of education at these institutions. Because between you and me, COVID-19 has changed so much that may never go back in terms of what is relevant to study. You will find that some courses will never be relevant after COVID. So, away from just thinking about SOPs and what, I think we just also need to look at the education sector wholesomely and try to reappreciate how best what we can make best out of what we have for now.
Still adapting technology into the new normal, especially where education is concerned. We do have the challenge of availability of e-learning facilitation such as computers or laptops. The internet across the country, the network across the country is not really good. I had an experience whereby I had to go to the road in Lira to actually get some sort of network to access internet and anything that I wanted on the internet. Coupled with the fact that when you see how Ministry of Education has been responding for lower education. They've been, distributing handout books to be able to cover different subjects. Now, with technology coming into the picture, we can't run away from it. It's surely the current normal. Even before COVID-19 was here, it was the current normal. We were just not paying attention to it. But now, how can different government entities work communitively to be able to push this agenda forward? And this would be Ministry of Education and Sports, as well as Ministry of ICT and National Guidance. How can they work together to ensure that they now push for adapting of technology in delivery of education as a service?
Rightly spoken, Priscilla. The world has gone global, and one of the wheels to this is technology, that is ICT. When we come to the education sector and how other stakeholders can come and help, first and foremost, with technology, you just need to ensure that, one, you need the gadgets, but also you need to be able to access, that is, and afford, because, you need data, much as you have the gadgets. So first and foremost, I think it's important that our government, as government, at such a time when we know that a big percentage of our students are going to depend on internet, how do we reduce the costs? Because one of the challenges is that even before we think of those that cannot access internet, how many of those that can access it can afford it? Recently I was speaking to one student who told me that maybe on a day she can use about 10,000. So how many of those can afford the 10,000 a day, where people are just also yearning to raise their tuition at such a time? So I think first government should immediately see either how they can find, maybe reduce them for education institutions, something like that. Then of course when it comes to accessing internet in some remote areas, still I think this goes to government. Either there is a private-public partnership that these telecommunication companies can be aided at such a time to make sure they make these investments in these places. Because, these are very expensive sector. Setting up just a mast for some of these telecommunication companies, they'll tell you it costs millions of monies. So if they do not have that, and government may not directly interest itself in that, then let them partner and see how accessible. Then you have institutions that can open up. There are many institutions in this country, even remote institutions. Maybe they have either an internet sport where they have Wi-Fi, and if they can open up to learners to some extent. I remember in Machindie, our division headquarters have Wi-Fi, and I think at some time it was open. So in the evenings, you would see youth gather around. At first I asked, but what brings these youth here? Everyone is on phone. There is free internet. So if we can have various organizations, government organizations, where they can find a way of helping these students in a safe manner. I want to emphasize that they can come and benefit from these opportunities, because most government institutions actually, some key have these internet services around.
All right.
Yeah, so I believe those can be some of the initiatives that can help access but also if we can extend more internet and reduce the costs, then we can help at such a time. Because this is not something that you can do very fast, but we can
calling for partnerships between private and government entities to be able to aid and facilitate introduction or adoption of technology into the new normal would really go along with the way we are seeing that partnership working out for the vaccination mass drive, partnering with different private entities to be able to push for the target number, which is 4.8 million fully vaccinated Ugandans by the end of December 2021. Still looking at higher education, reopening as today being 1st November. The other requisition for them to reopen under National Council of Higher Education is that they must submit progressive reports, one on status for the staff and also status for the students, because they are now on the targeted groups that must be vaccinated: teaching staff, non-teaching staff, and also students above the age of 18. And so they must submit a continuous progressive report on how many of their students have been vaccinated, how many of their staff have been vaccinated, to be able to deal with the vaccination drive and ensure that COVID-19 is manageable for these particular institutions, even when they get the virus. And it's much more it's easier to be handled as far as the health ed sector is also concerned.
Yeah, well, of course, that would be the best way of causing evaluation in terms of how compliant these universities are. Because, as Robert did say, that most of the students in these universities are above 18, if not all of them, But, however, as you talk about such progressive reports, the question then would also be how much is government putting in place to enhance the existence of this? How close is vaccination to some of these places? Are we using some of these institutions as also places or centers or, for vaccination? Because that would be another good opportunity. How are we partnering with these universities to make best out of these drives? How are we engaging the students? How are we engaging the staff? How are we, what are we putting in place away from just asking for progressive reports, at a national level?
Where you would report to get your job.
Well,
to get your job.
Maybe that can be one, but the question also that do we have enough jobs for all the people who are going back to universities? But at least as an option, we can look at centers at
the
particular
health
points.
Within,
for example, universities like Makerere, they have a full almost hospital. You have institutions like the YMCAs, they have big numbers, and they are just in the townships. You can have a center there, Chambogo, So I think we must also be able to help work with the universities to make some of these facilities available and also accessible. But Priscilla, if you may let me add something a bit that has been discussed also to complement the challenges we are facing today. Between you and me, we have been having discussions about what different can we do in terms of the kind of education we offer on a platter in Uganda. You will be surprised that today we are having a bitter conversation of universities, probably yet we shouldn't. You know that some of the students have been stuck in, let's say S4. An S4 vacists now, I don't know if they're still even vacists.
Yeah, but they're still vacists.
For about
not transition yet.
you would imagine that at that level, they must be able to find a livelihood at the level of S4. University should be a professional option for the people who will to go that far. But now with COVID, for example, for 2 years, let's say it went for 3 or 4, 5 years, would we have had people get stuck at those different levels? It's what I was saying earlier, that maybe even as we discuss all these remedies of security, how about we discuss the remedy of the kind of education we're offering the people? Because at the level of S4, if an S4 vacist or leaver can do nothing with their education, what kind of education are we giving to our children? Even what's more, S6, when you come with your head, jeg, what, leg, lug, what,
university,
and you can do nothing, and you have to wait till they open a university after 2 years for you to make sense out of what you studied. For me, I think that is also something important for us to question the kind of education we are giving. Because today it's COVID. As I've told you, COVID will manifest in various ways. it will manifest in very many ways. It may not be necessarily the COVID-19, but something, whoever saw this happening? 2019 around this time, who cared? We're talking about Wuhan. And guess what? Before we knew. So I think this should also question, as we open these universities, the teaching staff, the academic staff should be able to revise the content they give. Is this useful content to cause change in people's lives? At a first year level as a law student, when you go back, can you draft a contract? Can you live on that at least as a first year?
You see,
as a doctor?
That is where you do have the units, and you cannot, the units are also progressively done or designed to be able to complete the course.
To complement a bigger picture.
Even if you put it that way, then that means you're going to compress
but then
the kind of education that we're having.
Isn't that what it should be? Because education at the end of the day should make sense at every level. Just like how you're training, let's say you went for cake lessons. At least on the first day, you come out knowing that I know how to mix. So your cake. You can't say that I'll wait for let's say 1 month or 2 months to be able to because
you see, you cannot compare cake making to law.
It's all education.
The same thing.
Recently, I think the ministry came out, due to COVID-19, the ministry came out with a revised syllabus, and also with the National Curriculum Development Center. And one of the things I was listening very well to Dr. Dennis Mujimba, he said, we have tried to remove a lot that we think is irrelevant in our syllabus, and only leave that we think is very important. We've recognized that even some course units or some subjects, some discipline subjects can be condensed or some left out. I hope what was removed and what was left in the syllabus now is going to be that can address the challenges that Felix is talking about.
Okay, another challenge that we see may actually crop up with this higher education reopening as of today, 1st November, is the cost of education. By the time we went into the total lockdown in June, higher institutions had already started and had gone 1 month into their semester. Now government is coming out to warn any of these institutions that they should not increase the fees or the tuition fees for the students as they come back to complete the semester. Whatever had been paid, if one student had done a full-term payment, that should be it. If a student had done 80%, they should only cover the 20% of the initial fees structure before schools were closed. Anything that goes beyond that is actually going to be punishable in regards to government. So now then begs the question of COVID-19 in education sector reopening, because we do have the testings that have to be happening. You do have the monitoring, the temperatures, you do have the different SOPs that must be managed that come at a cost, and unfortunately that's a financial cost, and yet we're not seeing government coming out to say that they're going to be giving the private sector this amount of money to be able to help them aid in reopening of the education sector. So where does this leave the financial burden, and on whom does it leave the financial burden?
I think that was a discussion over a cup of tea. I don't take that serious, because we must understand that with liberalization of our economy and privatization of the education sector, the certain things that government can speak of but cannot enforce fully. You have about 28,000 private schools in this country. Universities, I may not have the figures right, but I also know that you'll find that majority of these universities and some tertiary institutions belong to the private sector. And you see, COVID-19 comes with a